Night spread across a wide canal where the water moved with a slow, steady certainty. The surface held long bands of darkness broken by scattered points of lamplight from distant bridges. Each lamp reflected downward as a thin ribbon that trembled, then straightened, then trembled again. Stone embankments bordered the canal, their blocks fitted tightly, seams softened by damp. Above the stones, narrow streets ran parallel to the water, quiet and empty, their shop fronts shut and their awnings drawn. The sky held a low veil of cloud that thinned in places, allowing a few pale stars to appear. Far along the canal, a soft glow drifted, not fixed like a street lamp, but moving, steady, and warm. The glow resolved into a long, low vessel sliding through the canal with almost no wake. Its hull was dark wood sealed to a satin sheen, the waterline traced by a thin band of lighter paint. Above the hull rose a structure like a small house built on a barge. Windows in neat rows, a gently sloped roof, and a short lantern mast near the center. The windows were lit from within, not bright, but enough to reveal shelves and the suggestion of spines lined in order. A name was painted along the bow in careful letters, though the canal mist softened the edges and made the words difficult to read from a distance. The vessel moved as if guided by the canal's own current, aligned perfectly in the middle of the water. Behind the vessel, the wake formed in delicate folds, spreading outward in smooth arcs until it reached the stone walls. There, the wavelets climbed a few inches, then slid back down, leaving darker wet patches that slowly lightened. The library's wake did not slap or churn. It seemed pressed flat by patience. Along the side of the vessel, small mooring rings were fixed at even intervals, each ring catching a faint glint as it passed a lamp. A narrow rope ladder hung near the stern, its lower rungs just above the water, swaying by a fraction with each subtle motion. The vessel's lights cast soft rectangles onto the canal surface, and the rectangles stretched and shortened as ripples crossed. As the vessel drifted closer, the windows revealed more, tall shelves standing inside like quiet walls, each shelf packed with books of varied heights. Some spines were pale, others deep and dark. Some had gold lines that caught the light, then vanished when the angle changed. Curtains were pulled halfway across a few windows, their fabric thick and still, leaving narrow gaps that framed rows of pages. A table lamp inside created a small pool of brighter light in one corner, illuminating a stack of books arranged by size. The vessel's interior looked orderly, with no clutter beyond deliberate piles. The windows also reflected the canal's lamps, so shelves and reflections layered together, making the library appear deeper than its footprint. The roof of the library vessel was covered in dark shingles, each one overlapping the next like scales. Along the roofline, a thin gutter ran to collect mist, and droplets gathered there in tiny beads. Near the center, the lantern mast rose, a slender pole with a small lantern housing at its top. The lantern light was warm and constant, enclosed in frosted glass that softened the beam into a halo. Beneath the mast, a low skylight sat flush with the roof, its panes divided by thin metal strips. The skylight held a faint interior glow, suggesting an upper reading loft or narrow storage space. The mast did not sway. The vessel held itself steady on the canal as if balanced on hidden rails. Along the side of the vessel, a small bell hung from a bracket near the front door. The bell was not ringing, but it had the polished look of a well-used object. Its clapper rested centered, and a thin cord hung down, neatly tied with a small knot. The door beneath the bell was wooden with a rounded top, painted a faded deep color that appeared almost black in the night. A brass handle caught a highlight as the vessel passed under a bridge lamp. Above the door, a narrow plaque was mounted, the lettering too fine to read at this distance. The bow remained still, and the vessel continued forward, as though docking were an occasional possibility rather than an immediate plan. The canal narrowed slightly as the vessel approached a stone bridge. The bridge arch was wide and smooth, its underside dark, its stones damp with mist. Lantern light from the bridge above orned a bright oval on the water under the arch. The library vessel entered the oval, and the interior windows brightened briefly as reflections intensified. The roof shingles gained sharp definition for a moment, then soft again as the vessel moved into shadow. Under the bridge, the canal sound became quieter, as if the arch absorbed it. The vessel's wake pressed against the bridge's stone supports and returned in gentle ripples that crossed behind the stern in a faint crisscross pattern. Emerging from the far side, the vessel returned to open canal light with the same steady pace. From the nearest windows, aisles inside the library could be traced, narrow corridors between shelves, straight and calm. The shelves rose nearly to the ceiling, leaving a small gap where warm light gathered. In one aisle, a rolling ladder stood on a rail, its steps narrow, its wood polished. The ladder was positioned precisely, parallel to the shelf face, as if paused mid-task. At the end of another aisle, a circular window looked inward from a partition wall, framing a single shelf of larger volumes. Bookends shaped like simple stones held a row upright. A globe sat on a low cabinet, its surface matte, its metal meridian band faintly reflective. Everything within appeared arranged by quiet rules of spacing and symmetry, as though order itself were a cataloging system. A larger window revealed a central room with long reading tables aligned end to end. The tabletops were dark wood rubbed to a soft sheen. On each table sat a small lamp with a greenish shade, casting a limited circle of light that left the surrounding wood in gentle shadow. Chairs were tucked in neatly, their backs matched, their legs aligned. Between two lamps, a narrow vase held dried reeds, pale and still, adding a vertical line among horizontal surfaces. A ledger book lay open on one table, its pages filled with columns and careful handwriting, as though it recorded titles, dates, and shelf positions. Nearby, a shallow tray held metal bookmarks, thin strips with small cutout shapes arranged like tools. The room looked prepared for quiet use, yet it remained unchanged as the vessel moved, held steady by the canal's slow motion. The vessel's motion made the book seem even more settled, as if the shelves were anchored to something deeper than wood. Along one window, a set of stacked volumes formed a small tower beside a chair, each book aligned at the spine. A thin ribbon bookmark trailed from the top volume and lay flat, unmoving, as though air inside the library had become still. In another corner, a cart with 2 levels stood with its wheels locked, holding a selection of books whose covers were darker and thicker than the rest. A small plaque on the cart edge displayed a symbol, a simple inked circle, and a line suggesting a category rather than a word. The floating library carried its stacks through the canal as a single coherent space, the way a room carries furniture, regardless of what lies beyond its walls. Along the canal, side streets opened as narrow gaps between buildings, revealing deeper darkness within. Occasionally, a small courtyard appeared, paved with stones and holding a single fountain that was not running. Window boxes hung beneath upper windows, their plants reduced to silhouettes. The floating library passed these openings slowly, and its light spilled onto the stone embankment in soft rectangles that slid along the wall like moving paintings. Reflections wavered at the base of the embankment, doubling the library's windows in the water. The canal lamps remained fixed points, while the library's glow traveled between them, filling the spaces with a warmer tone. Overhead, thin lines of laundry rope stretched between buildings, empty and slack. The city seemed built to watch the canal quietly rather than interrupt it. Inside, near one window, a single large book rested on a stand like a displayed volume. Its cover was dark and smooth, corners reinforced with metal. The pages were thick, edged with faint speckling, as if made from pressed fiber. A bookmark, flat, pale, and shaped like a narrow wave, marked a place near the middle. The stand beneath was simple, crossed wooden legs and a flat cradle to hold the book open at an angle. The book's title was written in a small, careful script, visible only as a band of letters that appeared and disappeared as the vessel shifted relative to a bridge lamp. The book remained open to a spread filled with neat lines and diagrams that resembled current maps. The library vessel continued its route, and the displayed books seemed part of the same cataloging. Water recorded like volumes, swells like chapters, canals like shelves. The vessel made a subtle sound that traveled along the canal, not an engine roar, but a quiet whisper of movement. It sounded like water sliding along a polished hull, and like rope gently shifting against a mooring ring. Sometimes the sound changed under bridges, becoming softer and more enclosed, then returning to open-air clarity. The lantern mast glass clicked faintly once, a small adjustment in temperature, then settled again. Inside, nothing appeared to rattle. Lamps remained steady, books stayed aligned. The whispering sound seemed to belong to the vessel's passage itself, as though the library carried its own hush. The canal answered with muted lapping against stone, and together the sounds formed a low, even pattern that repeated with every few feet of travel. One interior wall near the front looked different from the shelves. It held a grid of small drawers, catalog drawers, each with a metal label frame and a round pull. The frames were empty or too small to read through the window, but their repetition created a precise pattern, row after row of identical rectangles. A narrow ladder leaned nearby, its feet aligned with the floorboards. On a small counter beneath the drawers, a set of ink stamps rested in a tray. Circular stamps, rectangular stamps, and one stamp shaped like a tiny lighthouse silhouette. Beside them lay a pad of paper with perforated edges. Everything on the counter sat within its own boundary, aligned to invisible guidelines. The catalog wall suggested that every object, every title, every subject had a place mapped out in advance, and the library simply moved through the world, carrying that mapping with it. Near the stern, a shelf held large atlases and folded charts in cloth sleeves. Their spines were wide, their titles stamped in muted ink. A few charts were rolled and tied with thin cords, ends capped with wooden dowels. A brass divider separated sections, each divider etched with a symbol, a star, a wave, a bridge arch, a spiral. The symbols repeated at intervals, suggesting categories that were more about shapes than names. Below the atlases, a shallow drawer set slightly open by a fraction, revealing a thin stack of vellum-like sheets. The sheets were translucent, their edges faintly glowing when a lamp passed behind them. The shelf appeared designed for routes and passages, for the kind of information that could be folded, rolled, or laid flat, appropriate cargo for a library that traveled by water and carried its rooms through night canals. The canal widened into a broader basin where the embankments stepped back and the buildings opened into a small waterfront square. The square held evenly spaced posts and a low stone terrace that met the water. A few benches lined the terrace, their surfaces damp and dark. A line of lanterns stood along the terrace edge, their reflections creating a comb of light on the basin's surface. The floating library entered the basin, and its wake spread wider, forming gentle concentric arcs that intersected with the terrace reflections. The vessel's windows appeared doubled and tripled in the moving water, each reflection slightly offset, creating a layered corridor of light leading behind the stern. The library slowed by a subtle degree, not stopping, simply easing its pace as though matching the basin's larger scale. The lantern mast halo widened in the open space, and the vessel's warm glow filled the square with a traveling calm. Near the basin's edge, a small floating dock rested, tethered by chains that rose and fell slightly with the water. The dock was empty, its planks wet, its cleats unused. The library vessel approached at an angle so slight it looked like an alignment rather than a turn. Its hull drifted parallel to the dock, and for a moment the distance between wood and wood narrowed until the gap was only a thin, dark line. A fender round and pail hung from the vessel's side and touched the dock lightly, preventing any scrape. The docking bell remained still. The door stayed closed. No gangway dropped. The vessel did not fully fasten. It hovered alongside as if acknowledging the dog's existence, then drifted forward again, letting the dog fall behind. The brief contact left a small ripple pattern that moved outward and softened into the basin. A skylight glow strengthened briefly as the vessel passed beneath a brighter terrace lantern. Through the skylight, an upper loft could be inferred, a narrow mezzanine lined with low shelves and cushions arranged in neat rectangles. The cushions were dark, their edges straight, placed with equal spacing. A low rail guarded the loft edge. Along the loft's back wall, a row of small framed prints hung evenly, ink drawings of bridges, canal bends, lighthouses, and boats, simple lines with wide blank spaces. A small brass telescope rested on a stand, pointing toward a window, though the window showed only night water and reflections. The loft looked like a quiet gallery within the library, a place of surfaces and maps and small framed shapes held under the roof like a second horizon. The vessel continued, and the loft's glow faded to its previous gentle level as the brighter lantern passed behind. Leaving the basin, the library vessel returned to a narrower canal where the buildings leaned closer again. The reflections tightened into longer, thinner ribbons. The wake pressed against stone walls and returned in small cross ripples that traveled behind the stern, then smoothed away. Bridge arches appeared at intervals, each one framing the vessel as it moved through, light, then shadow, then light again. Inside, the reading lamps remained steady, their green shades unchanged. Shelves remained aligned, ladders stayed in place, catalog drawers kept their precise grid. The vessel's movement stayed consistent, the whispering sound continuing along the waterline. The canal lamps passed in a slow sequence, and each time the vessel went by, its windows brightened briefly, then soft as the next gap of shadow arrived. The floating library carried its rooms forward without interruption, and the canal accepted it as part of the night's repeating architecture. Farther along, the canal's lamps became more widely spaced, and the spaces between glows stretched into deeper darkness. The floating library continued through those spaces, its warm interior light becoming the primary illumination for the water immediately around it. Reflections lengthened, then narrowed, then lengthened again, depending on the surface's smoothness. The vessel's hull cut the water with minimal disturbance, leaving a gentle line of motion that faded behind. Inside, the shelves and tables held their calm arrangement, and the displayed volumes remained where they were, open or closed according to their own placement. The city's stone walls and bridges passed by in quiet repetition, and the library vessel's windows slid along them as moving rectangles of light. Gradually, the canal seemed to widen into deeper night, and the floating library became a traveling island of ordered shelves and soft lamps, continuing onward while the surrounding darkness remained smooth and unbroken, carrying the last visible shimmer into a gentler, quieter glow.